Hi there, it's been a while. Welcome to Layman's Terms with Levi. To refresh your memory, Levi is an analytical chemist by degree, but by profession, he's a senior project manager for a Houston-based plastics manufacturing company. So we usually talk about scientific stuff, quantum physics, the theory of relativity, all that stuff, but tonight we thought we'd kind of change it up a little bit. So tonight, Levi will break down very simply in layman's terms some of the overall occurrences that transpired between World War I and World War II, most of which the average population is probably unaware of, including myself. So he's not a historian, but his explanation opened my eyes to it versus what we are taught in school. Our disclaimer, quickly, these are solely Levi's thoughts, opinions, etc., based on nothing but resources he has attained on his own free will. And another disclaimer, we also have Frozen 2 playing in the background for our two kiddos, so forgive us if they demand some screen time here. But by the way, if you haven't noticed, Levi's from Yakima, Washington. Apparently, they grow a lot of beer. But it's relevant, actually. However, he's also worn the same shirt in every video.
It's the only shirt I own.
Apparently so. We clean it a lot. We wash it like every other week. Anyway, it's relevant to this video. So we'll get to that later. But Levi, starting out, tell us how World War II started.
Okay, that's a very long intro.
Yes.
Sorry. World War II, I shouldn't say everybody, I think most Americans think, oh, well, World War II probably got started when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. That is true, that's when we got involved, but it actually been going on a lot longer than that. And the reason World War II got started was because Germans were pretty upset with a bill that they got stuck with, which actually that bill came from World War I. And World War I got started when a czar, an Austrian czar named Franz Ferdinand, not the band, the czar Franz Ferdinand.
I don't even know.
He was assassinated. He was in Serbia. I can't remember what the hell he was doing. He was out there seeing something, like military or something. Anyway, he got assassinated by a bunch of Serbian extremists, and it was kind of like the spark that lit the fuse. It wasn't the whole reason the war kicked off, but it was like the main reason. And at that point, Russia took sides with the Serbians, and the Germans took sides with the Austrians. And World War I kicked off, and that was the whole trench warfare and all that stuff. Well, the Germans were really, really super aggressive, and I think they kind of took it as an opportunity to try to invade other countries. So they did so, and obviously, World War I ended, and I think a lot of people were upset with Germany for what they did. So they basically, all the countries of the world billed Germany for reparations. Like basically said, you got to come back and you got to give me cash. And the Germans, of course, didn't have the economy to support this. So their solution was they just started printing money with no backing.
Oh, wow.
So when you do that, you have inflation like through the roof because, of course, there's nothing to back the value of that I think it's a franc that's in Germany. There's nothing to back it. So they were just printing and paying these bills, which the whole economy collapsed. And when that happened, people were really, really upset. They were upset at the banking system because they thought the banking system was the one who did it. Right. Probably wasn't. It was probably the government. And this like little known guy that really nobody knew named Adolf Hitler got to focus a lot of people's attention, and he started blaming the Jewish community on the fact that, well, it's the banks that are the problem. And I don't know where his hatred or where his problem came from, but he was able to basically focus an entire nation on, well, this is your problem. This is why you should do what I want. So he came to power. And then, of course, when he came to power, the first thing he did was he invaded Poland. So, again, Germany went right back to invading other countries. And that kind of is what kicked off World War II. The U.S. was out of it for a really long time.
Yeah, it came in towards the end.
1944, 43, something like that.
Yeah.
And the reason we got involved in the war, obviously, is because our allies were,
eating us.
Our allies were getting the snot kicked out of them by the Germans. And the Russians were getting beat, and the Russians had, they were getting beat on two sides, right? So America got involved when Japan basically bombed Pearl Harbor. And at that point, a lot of people don't realize is we'd actually cut off quite a few supply lines for Japan that a lot of people don't talk about, but they bombed us because we cut supply lines off.
So it had nothing to do with the war initially?
Well, I mean, it did. It did. Our allies were, I mean, there was a point where we were actually looking at taking horses and carriages and loading planes and tanks and dragging them across the Canadian border and then having Canada send them to the war effort so we could stay out of the war. Because if we physically moved them across, that would be a war effort and we'd be drug in. So it's just really kind of weird, convoluted how it happened. But we were eventually going to get drug in. But what ultimately drug us in was the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Right. And so everybody, I feel like most Americans think that that's what started World War II, was when
No, the war had been going on for like over a year. It had been a long time.
Interesting.
Yeah. And what's even funnier is we totally kind of set ourselves up, because the reason we moved our entire naval fleet to Hawaii was because we were afraid of saboteurs getting a hold of our naval fleet when they were based in California. So we took our entire naval fleet and we sent it out to Hawaii, and we lined them all up so we could keep a really close eye on them. And
Sitting ducks.
They were sitting ducks, and we didn't realize was the Japanese had launched a naval fleet to bomb us. So we really helped them out by doing that. But anyway, so Pearl Harbor got bombed. America joins the war. You know, we're in Europe, we're in Africa, we're in Egypt. You know, we're fighting all these fronts. And then here's where Yakima comes into play. So you had this thing called the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was basically the atomic bombs that were developed and dropped eventually on Japanese soil. And focusing on the shirt, I see. So all of it was a uranium plutonium blend, but all of that was basically purified and made in a place called Hanford, Washington, which is just like right outside Yakima, Washington. I remember growing up, I drove by this facility, like you can barely see it. It's way out in the desert. It's next to a river because, of course, they need the river to cool the reactors, but there is nothing. I mean, it is out on a basalt flat in the middle of nowhere.
And guys, when I first started dating Levi and he took me home for the first time to Yakima, Washington, I was amazed that it's desert, and he was like, oh yeah, there's a military place over there, and I'm going, really? It's complete desert that leads out from this amazing Everest forest. It's unbelievable. It's beautiful. You should go visit if you get a chance.
Well, anyway, Hanford you won't be able to visit because it's still closed off by military. It's out in the middle of nowhere. So anyway, all the uranium, all the plutonium was made, or that blend was made or purified in Hanford, and then it was shipped, and I think it was shipped down to somewhere in Nevada. And they only had enough for 3 bombs. And each bomb, believe it or not, is about the size of a grapefruit, right? So when you think about the devastation that took place, it basically came from something the size of a grapefruit, which takes me back to, you're going to have to edit that, which takes me back to my very, very, very original Einstein E equals MC squared, is the amount of energy in that is basically equal to the speed of light squared. So if you think about something that has a mass that's super, super, super heavy, there is a ton of energy in there. Turn it off. I'm distracted. So the greater the mass of something, the amount of energy within that is it's basically the square root of the speed of light, which is huge. So that's why they're able to get so much energy out of something that's like a grapefruit. So they took 3 of these grapefruits, they tested one in Nevada, and of course it went bang. So we knew that Einstein and Oppenheimer, he was another gentleman who worked on that, it worked, right? So it was total theoretical physics, and it worked. They're the first in the world to ever make a nuclear weapon.
Wow.
So they did that. So we had 2 more. I think one was called Big Boy and the other one was called Little Boy, if I remember right. They took them.
Makes sense. It's very unique.
Flew them over to Asia, or Asia Pacific, put them on a plane, and they dropped those bombs. They dropped the first one on, I believe, Hiroshima, and of course it decimated the city, and no one had ever seen anything like this. And at first, I think the Japanese, they called our bluff and said, "No, there's no way you have 2 of those." and we only had 2. And then we dropped the second one on Nagasaki. And when that one dropped, I think within like a matter of days, the Japanese met on an aircraft carrier right outside in the Pacific, and they basically surrendered. They signed off. But
Wow.
but a lot of people don't realize too is Germany had already been defeated by that point. So the Japanese were the last like stronghold. Germany had already folded. You know, Adolf Hitler got, I think it was syphilis, and he was like died in a bunker somewhere, and he was long gone. Japanese were the last ones to beat, and they were tough.
Wow.
So.
Okay, one more question before we sign off here. Levi, can you tell us where the word blitz in football? Yeah. I mean, we're both NFL fans or
cool.
football fans, so.
So, in World War I, everything was trench warfare, right? So you'd gain ground, and the first thing you did was you fortified. Well, if you think about it, so does your enemy, right? So it's this constant fortification battle. This is where they were really, really smart. Adolf Hitler and his generals, where they realized if you just punch a hole through their lines, you can mow right through every town, every city, because all of their military is behind you. And then you can cut off their supply lines, and you've got them surrounded with no supply lines, and you can totally beat them. So in World War II, the Germans developed what was called Blitzkrieg. And Blitzkrieg was just basically hit them really, really strong, really, really fast with everything you got, and just mow them down. Don't even worry about fortifying. Just keep going and going and going until you get to a certain point. So it's called Blitzkrieg. Well, in the NFL, we call it a blitz. But if you think about it, it's the exact same thing, where instead of just kind of fending each other off, you blitz. You bring everybody in and you just overwhelm them.
Yep.
So it's called a blitzkrieg.
And those of you who know football totally understand that.
So we call it a blitz.
If you don't like football, then sign off
watch.
right now. All right, thanks, Levi. This is Layman's Terms with Levi, and we thank you for tuning in. Bye. Say hi, Lyra. She doesn't want to say hi. Okay.